Get ready to challenge what you thought you knew. Don't miss an episode of The Truth Within the Bible. Your journey to enlightenment starts now.
Welcome back, my friends. We're going to pick it up here in a moment in Genesis chapter 13. Remember, Abram's name has not been changed yet to Abraham. He and Sarai went into Egypt near Pharaoh, and Pharaoh had made them very rich. But inasmuch as you well know, Abram had told Sarai to tell him she was his sister, rather than his wife, and it caused a great deal of consternation among the Egyptians, and they asked them to leave very politely, but firmly. So Lot, who was Abram's nephew, and Abram and the whole clan, off they go. So we will continue on. Here in chapter 13, verse 1.
And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south.
Verse 2.
And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold.
Verse 3.
And he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai.
Bethel is house of God, and Hai is heap, so that being the layout. So he's back again. The famine is over, and he's back home again where he started. Not back home at the original, at Ur, but here at Bethel. Verse 4.
Unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord.
They came out with a lot more from Egypt than they went in with. And naturally, when he came back to that altar, he wanted to thank God for it. Verse 5.
And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks, and herds, and tents.
Verse 6.
And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together. For their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together.
In other words, there were too many animals and not enough grazing land immediately. So they had to split up their herds to have more pasture where their animals could sustain themselves. They had just grown too large for one congregation and enough fodder to feed their animals properly. Pasture. Verse 7.
And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land.
Now I want you to be well aware that the Perizzite is where the old Nephilim, the fallen angels, the leftover, were still with them there in a second influx. They remained there. So this is trouble. When you have strife and trouble, it's time to do something. You don't let something fester, or it will destroy your ministry. It will destroy their very shepherd grounds. Verse 8.
And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren.
You never want to let something like that settle near you, for it will always be trouble and strife. Verse 9.
Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left.
You even get to choose. You pick that way, and I will go the opposite direction. And we will have no strife. We'll have plenty of land. Everything will be cool. Verse 10.
And Lot lifted up his eyes, and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar.
Verse 11.
Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other.
Verse 12.
Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom.
Verse 13.
But the men of Sodom were wicked, and sinners before the Lord exceedingly.
Talk about strife. He stepped in it. Verse 14.
And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward.
Verse 15.
For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever.
Verse 16.
And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered.
This is a heavenly blessing. This is divine intervention. Do you understand? They didn't even have a child. Sarai was barren. And here he's telling him, you're not even going to be able to number your children. Verse 17.
Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee.
Verse 18, to finish this chapter.
Then Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord.
Hebron, meaning alliance. Abram loved our father. He always had that altar nearby. And our father knew that. Therefore, what happened? God always blessed him. Chapter 14, verse 1.
And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations.
Fun side note. Amraphel means the keeper of the gods. What a name. King of Shinar. That's another name for Babylon. Arioch means venerable. King of Elasar. Chedorlaomer. That's to say, severity. Servant, rather, of Gomar. King of Elam, meaning eternity. And Tidal. That's great son. King of nations. So here, we've got some people moving in here. Elasar, meaning oaks, solid, deep-rooted. Verse 2.
That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemaber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar.
Verse 3.
All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea.
Verse 4.
12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled.
They're right there below the Salt Sea. This is where we find Sodom and Gomorrah, basically, the very ruins of where God destroyed it, as is believed by archaeologists. Verse 5.
And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Amims in Shaveh Kiriathaim.
Now, what we've got here is the old Rephaims, is one of the name of the fallen ones. You got some bad people within this. Verse 6.
And the Horites in their Mount Ser unto Elparan, which is by the wilderness.
Horites. You call those cavemen. Dwellers. Not the cavemen that some teachers would have you think, because there is no such thing. But they were called that, because they dwelled in caves. Verse 7.
And they returned and came to Enmishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon-Tamar.
Verse 8.
And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same is Zoar. And they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim.
Verse 9.
With Chedorlaomer, the king of Elim, and with Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5.
Verse 10.
And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain.
They were beat badly. And what was left over as they ran into the slime pits, and were certainly defeated by. Naturally, you have Kenites, and you have leftover Nephilim, which you have some wisdom, but wisdom to do evil, and certainly without God's help. And certainly God was not going to help perverted people. They got their gourds thumped. That simple. Verse 11.
And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way.
Verse 12.
And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed.
Verse 13.
And there came one that had escaped, and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner. And these were confederate with Abram.
They were his buddies. Verse 14.
And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan.
God takes care of his own. But here we have this one with only 318 to fight. They're going to go get him. Verse 15.
And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus.
Chased them all the way to Syria. Verse 16.
And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people.
Rescue them. Verse 17.
And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him, at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale.
Verse 18.
And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God.
It says he was the priest of the Most High God. Now, what do we have here? Melchizedek, who is this? He didn't have a father. He didn't have a mother. He brings forth wine and bread. Do you suppose this was Christ we have with us here? Let's reinforce this by going to Hebrews chapter 7, verse 1.
For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him,
I will continue on through verse 4, still reading from the book of Hebrews.
to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the tenth of the spoils.
Well, why made like unto the Son of God? Why? Because he was the Son of God. Well, Christ wasn't born yet. Well, now can you better understand why in St. John chapter 8, verse 56, that Christ would say, you don't know what you're talking about. Before Abraham was, I am. In other words, he met Abraham. He saw Abraham. And do you remember the Kenites, what they said? You mean he claims that he's seen Abraham and he's only 33 years old? Or something of that nature? You see, they could not see the invisible part of the Spirit of the living God. So here, never let anyone deceive you who this Melchizedek was. Now let's return to this 14th chapter, and let's pick it up in verse 19.
And he blessed him, and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth.
Verse 20.
And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all.
Now, did you read over that? I hope not. It said, delivered thine enemies into thy hand. God did that. That, again, is how a party of 318 was able to conquer. When you acknowledge and know that you have God on your side, you are guaranteed not to lose. Verse 21.
And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself.
In other words, you've freed them. It's your right. In other words, they had thumped his gourd, the king of Sodom. And he rightfully says, I know none of it belongs to me, though it's my material. Verse 22.
And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lift up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth.
Verse 23.
That I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich.
This was an evil, wicked, perverted place. He does not want any part of it. Verse 24 to finish the chapter.
Save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Honor, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion.
Let's continue on with chapter 15, verse 1.
After these things the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield, and thy exceeding great reward.
Verse 2.
And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus.
What good would it do me to be blessed and have many things? I don't have any children. Sarai was barren. Verse 3.
And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir.
Verse 4.
And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir.
Verse 5.
And he brought him forth abroad, and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be.
In other words, you're not going to be able to count them. In many other places, he would say, they'll be as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the sea. And they are today. They're scattered everywhere. That is to say, the 12 tribes of the great house of Israel, which would come from this one. Verse 6.
And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness.
Verse 7.
And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees, to give thee this land to inherit it.
Ur is right in Iraq of today, which would be Babylon of then. And Chaldees is one of the names for Babylon, verse 8.
And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it?
Verse 9.
And he said unto him, Take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle-dove, and a young pigeon.
Verse 10.
And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another. But the birds divided he not.
This is normal layout for a sacrifice. And that's what it was. You split the animals and lay them off to each side, with a path in the center that you could walk through, basically, but save the birds. Verse 11.
And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away.
Keep the vultures out of the house of God. They have no business there. But they shall come. You can count on it. Verse 12.
And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him.
Verse 13.
And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years.
Verse 14.
And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance.
Your children are going to have a lot of more when they come out than they had when they go in. Why? Because I'm going to bless them. Well, there is a great conflict here, because it says in other places it was 430 years, not 400 years. And you, Aaron, not understanding what God is saying here. There are 430 years from the promise, but from the birth of Isaac, there's only 400 years. That's the seed. God's word doesn't contradict itself if it's properly translated. But even with the captivity, even in serving in this land, they're going to come out much richer and much more blessed than when they went in. Verse 15.
And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age.
Verse 16.
But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
Verse 17.
And it came to pass that, when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces.
Those carcasses of the sacrifice, God accepted it. And God is a consuming fire. And he partook of that sacrifice. It was pleasing to him. Verse 18.
In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates,
Verse 19.
The Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites,
Verse 20.
and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims,
Verse 21 to finish.
and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
And, of course, when he gave them the Jebusites, then he would also give them Jebus, which Jebus is the town that the Jebusites would form. And the reason I bring that particular one to your attention is because that is the original name of the great city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was formed by these Jebusites, but God gave it to Abram. It was for the eternity. When God speaks and makes a covenant that is a contract, for lack of a better word, it is a binding contract, and God will not break his word. Sometimes man will, but God never will. So there you have it. With the covenant being made to Abram and the fact that he didn't have an heir, well, let's see what happens in the next video, where we will start with chapter 16. Until then, stay strong, my friends.